Oh, within a few months after that, I had been asked to take the district forester's job at Linden because it was a much tougher job. And more people, more fires, and so forth. And I learned a few lessons up there. And I want to stress that point to these young foresters, that you learn something everywhere you go. We had a big fire in Harrison County, Marshall, Texas. And one of our crewmen was not able to be on the crew. So I drove down there in my vehicle, and Billy Haynes was the crew leader. And so we decided we were going to have to plow a line across this field to stop this fire. And Billy was the tractor operator, and I grabbed the backfire torch and I walked about 20 yards behind him, lighting the fire line so that we could get the fire contained. Well, about halfway across that field, the wind changed, and it just brought that fire right down on top of us. Well, Billy had the tractor, and he could take off, which he did. And I sized up the situation, and this was the day before Thanksgiving. I remember it well. I had my sleeves on a brand new shirt rolled up. I had my hard hat on, and that fire was coming right at me. And I knew that if I tried to run away from it, it was eventually going to catch up with me and probably do me some serious damage. I also knew on the other side of that fire line that the sedge grass, which was about waist high, was going to completely burn off, and there wouldn't be any fire behind it. But I had to run through that fire in order to get there. So I took a running head start at that backfire, and I pulled the helmet I had over my face because I knew from past experience and reading other things that the one thing you won't want to happen is to suck fire down into your lungs. So I took a deep breath, pulled it over my face, and had my hands on the helmet and took a running leap through the fire, and I could tell when I got through it. But I knew that I was burned, and my forearms were burned, which I still have scars on, and my ears were burned, but I had kept the fire out of my lungs. So Wayne Moore, our fire supervisor, showed up about that time. He took me to the hospital in Marshall. They dobbed me up. And I spent about 2 weeks. They transferred me to Linden for 2 weeks, where I was put in a bath of slurry to clean off the dead skin and so forth. And what I remember about that is, of course, my mother and father were mother was bedridden. Dad couldn't travel without her, leaving her, so they couldn't come up, which was 250, 300 miles. And Fulwiler had written an email to everybody that Bruce had been burned, but apparently it was not life-threatening or serious. But what I remember most is that neither Fulwiler nor the fire supervisor, Joe Burnside, Don Young, and others never bothered to come to the hospital to see me, to check on me. Andy Anderson, for whom Anderson Street is named here, the Anderson Arboretum. He was mayor of College Station for several years, did a wonderful job, has a part-time job while working for the Forest Service. Andy Anderson did come by and visit with me, which I appreciated. That would serve me well 25 years later when I had one of my employees, Roland Lambert, had a similar situation. I was then director of the Forest Service, and he, on day before Christmas it was, he was on a fire trying to save a house and got caught in the fire and terribly burned. I got a call that he had been life flighted to Parkland Hospital in Dallas, which was where I believe they took John F. Kennedy later. And so I called a friend of mine, the pilot for the university airplane, and Bob Wright. And I said, Bob, I need to fly to Dallas to check on one of my people that was burned. And he said, Bruce, you know, this is the day before Christmas. And Bob and I were very good friends. I said, Bob, this man may not live to see Christmas. I said, I want to go. And I'll never forget Bob. He said, by the time you get here, I'll have the plane warmed up. So I got there and flew up to Love Field, went in to see him, and he was a mess, bandaged all up and so forth. And I asked Wayne, who was also there, how it looked, and he said, well, it's touch and go right now. Well, Roland lived for about 3 or 4 weeks, but his lungs were so badly burned that he eventually finally got him and so forth. And I went up there fairly regularly to see him. So I always told my guys after that, you know, there's no job you've got that's more important than checking on an employee that's been seriously injured. And so they asked me to give the eulogy at his funeral. And the minister told me, he said, you know, don't be alarmed if they bring a guy in handcuffs for the funeral, because he's in prison over in Louisiana, one of the more infamous prisons in Louisiana. I said, it won't bother me a bit. So as it turned out, they wouldn't allow him to come. So anyway, I did give a eulogy for Roland, and that's probably one of the toughest days of my life as director of the Forest Service. And after that, Paul Kramer became director in 1967 when Fowler retired. I and Paul had both talked about things we would change when Fowler left, and we did, but that kind of summed up my field experience.